Welcome to Cult Connections. Let's see what we are taking a sideways look at today. Hi, it's Ian here. I am delighted to say that Kevin Jon Davies has joined me there today. How are you there, Kevin?
It's very nice to be here and looking forward to our chat.
Well, thank you so much. Now the purpose there today, it's a slightly different. So there, Kevin is a they're sort of creative, their person. He's worked on lots of different their shows, films, their sort of projects, and we're actually going to talk about three things that Kevin has worked on, which are also three things that I really like. So that's the link for the show there today. Very varied. It does kind of cover your earlier work there, Kevin. So just for people who don't they know you, how would you sort of sum that up?
Well, I've got a very schizophrenic CV. I started as an animator, that's for hand-drawn animation, and I worked in that field for about 13 years. And then I had an opportunity to change over to something I'd been hankering after, which was live action. And since then, on and off, I've been a live action director mainly for documentaries, but a little bit of drama and a little bit of comedy. And I also art directed a large coffee table book of Douglas Adams's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, his first novel as a big pictorial work, and that was a great thing to do. And I'm back on doing another book now about Douglas's archives, which I held at his old college at Cambridge. And I'm just waiting for, because of COVID and everything, there are restrictions, and I'm waiting for that to lift so that I can get dug into the archive and research. I've also researched for other people like Andrew Pixley, the television historian, occasionally, because he lives in Nottingham and I live in North London. So I've been to various archives for him on little errands. So I quite enjoy the research part of any project.
Yeah.
So that's it, really. It's a bit of a mishmash of different things, and there are also a lot of them are things that I enjoy. You talk about enjoyment.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for the fact that I have enjoyed many of the shows and things that I've worked on. So ticked off a few sort of fan favorites and plenty of things ticked off the bucket list, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. I mean, when I have a look through your their sort of credits, as it were, I'm like, oh yeah, I like that. I own that one. I think I own. I either probably own half of the projects that you have actually worked on. So,
well, thank you. It's nice to know there's someone out there. You're the one. Yeah.
I think in many ways, where we will start with, and it's probably the big one really, and probably the one that's sort of woven its way through a lot of your work, as it were, and you have just sort of touched on it. So we're going to go back to 1981, and that is the BBC their television adaptation of the Hitchhiker's Guide. But sort of prior to that, there, Kevin, what were you were a fan? You'd listened there to the radio show and.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I grew up as a fan of Doctor Who. It was there from when I was about age 2 onwards, so I don't remember a time without that show. And I liked the Goon Show. Someone gave me the scripts book, and I, with friends, I used to record those at school and play them back for our own amusement and things. So the Hitchhikers, when it came along, I was at a friend's house, and he said, "I'm going to listen to a repeat of this radio sci-fi comedy thing." And I thought, oh, and as a teenager, Radio 4, I don't know. But you know, yeah, I was so grateful to him, because not only did I become immediately a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but 2 weeks later, with that same chap, I went to see Douglas in his office at the BBC and interviewed him for the first time. That was in late 1978. So there followed a sort of 20 years of my life crisscrossing with Douglas. And of course, it's been another 20 years since he sadly died so young, doing various other projects. You know, Hitchhikers has been there throughout my career, always there in the background and always coming back, whatever else I may have been doing. But yes, very much a fan.
So, so thinking about going back then, so the Douglas would have been working on the Doctor Who at the time, yeah.
Yes, he'd just been made script editor, and we went to interview him 2 weeks into that role in the Doctor Who office at Shepherd's Bush. And there he was sitting there, and I was mainly invited, I think, because I'd had a brand new tape recorder, a cassette recorder for my birthday. I think that's why I was invited. Little did I know that it was going to change the course of my life, you know. But Douglas was very witty and charming, and you know, he spoke like he wrote, and he wrote like he spoke. You know, that was the man. When you read Douglas's words, he's finely crafted text that is just springing straight from his mind in his style. You know, all the interviews I hear, I find amusing because it was all there right at the beginning. You could hear it in this old tape recording from '78.
Just to maybe, I know that a lot of my their listeners are they're sort of stateside, so they may be not that sort of aware of the earlier parts of, say, sort of Hitchhikers and so on. So I do know a lot of people I've spoken to are a lot more familiar with the book itself and the film, actually. So, but one of the things that always kind of strikes me about the sort of Douglas Adams, and I always find this quite they're sort of ironic in a way, is that he used to talk a lot about having the writer's block and having that sort of fear of you know, sort of deadlines would be skipping past him and so on. But this actual sort of time was an amazing their sort of creative, their sort of burst for him. I mean, actually working on sort of Doctor Who and they're doing Hitchhikers.
Yeah, and of course, when I first met him that day, he was having to sort out the tail end of the outgoing script editor's work, and they were working on, I think, the Armageddon Factor and things like that. In fact, Graham Williams kept coming in from next door, from his office, trying to chive us along a bit and say, "Douglas, you know, we've got this scene to write," which I think was the final Key to Time scene or something, you know. And he was, he was quite enjoying, I think, us, you know, adoring young fans wanting to hang on his every word. And in the end, Graham Williams just came in, sat down and joined in. So, yeah, we got the sense that there was a lot going on. And Douglas was saying, and then I've got this, there was talk of their mate do an animated Hitchhiker at the time. Plus he said, and I've still got this damn book to write, if only I could get it finished. And so, you know, with hindsight, you listen to that on the tape and you think, oh, come on, Douglas, just put everything else down, do that book, because that's going to make your fortune. And it did. And of course, from, as you're saying, your Americans audience might be more familiar with the book or the movie, of course, which is the biggest, most sort of public display of Hitchhiker I think there's ever been. The real fans go back to the core of where it all began, which is the radio series. A lot of people don't realize it started on radio. He wrote the book based on the first part of the radio series. The novel just exploded everywhere. I mean, it's been translated into every language imaginable. And it was also huge in America. You know, he found himself very quickly on the top 10 list, you know, in the New York Times and things. So yes, that's definitely where his fame sprang from. But I think, you know, fans, they discover it backwards sometimes. You find out a lot of younger fans especially love the movie, even though the diehard fans from your, point out to things that they don't like about the film. I think the film, I call it Hitchhiker Light. I think it's it's the easiest, most accessible, most popular version of the guide in any form.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully those that are intrigued by it will go back and rediscover the source
Mm-hmm.
of where it all came from. And there's no doubt, although for me the radio series is it, that's the golden beginnings of it all, the books definitely are the real true voice of Douglas Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not filtered by other production requirements or other people's input or anything. The books are the most pure essence of Douglas's mind at work. And that's what I'm going on to explore in this book that I'm doing. Perhaps we'll talk about later.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I always, if there are fans, I would always actually point them there towards that era of the Doctor Who as well, because you can very much hear their voice in it, and there is even the odd sort of cross sort of reference as well with
there are, if you
brilliant.
spot them, in Doctor Who, you can see his influence everywhere, with things like the Doctor pulling a book by Oolong Kalufid out of his pocket,
exactly,
and little things like, and odd lines as well. I'll never be cruel to gin and tonic again. Is a line from Hitchhiker, and of course that's in Pirate Planet. You can hear a version of that about the frictionless tunnel that they zap down. There's lots of little things, but he was writing both Pirate Planet and the first radio series of Hitchhiker at the same time. So he was enormously productive in those early days, at a very young age. I mean, he was launched upon the world. By the time he was 26, he was suddenly found himself getting quite wealthy and renowned. And I mean, by 1984, I went to an awards thing that Pan Books threw for him to celebrate the first 1 million copies.
Wow.
Well, he's had a good many more million copies sold since. There was actually, for your American fans, there is quite a funny thing to ponder upon, that Douglas once said that because at the time the population of America was like 4 times that of the UK. I think nowadays it's nearer 5 times the population. But at the time he said so, but in America, he sold twice as many books. So he couldn't work out if he was twice as popular or only half as popular. Which is a typical Douglas thought, 2 ways of looking at that.
Just before, I must admit, I'm always sort of fascinated by this one, because I do believe there was actually a stage adaptation of the sort of Hitchhikers round about the same sort of time as well. Did you get to see that? Is that something that you might?
Yes, I was very lucky. There was a little group of fans of general science fiction. We used to all meet in a pub in London on the first Thursday of every month. In fact, Douglas himself went there once upon a time. I mean, previous patrons have been people like Arthur C. Clarke. Lots of sci-fi writers have been to this pub, and it was crammed to the doors with fans of all sorts. One group of people there that I made friends with, they decided they were going to go to this stage play of Hitchhikers, and I didn't even know it was happening. The publicity wasn't enormous, but it was because of the way it was arranged in this art centre on the Mall, basically at the other end of the street from where the Queen lives at Buckingham Palace. It's this little arts venue, the ICA, and they had a theatre space, and the director had turned it into a journey through the galaxy on a very slim budget. I mean, all the sets were made of, cardboard and tinfoil and plastic bags and things, but the energy behind it was wonderful. So this live performance, the audience sat on a hovercraft.
Okay.
And it was a floating platform that would turn and go to each corner of the room where the sets were built all the way around the auditorium.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah, you can only get so many people on this floating platform, only about 60, or I heard someone say 80 people, but it was like a boxing ring or a wrestling ring
Mm-hmm.
with a bunch of chairs on it. It was very crude. But they used the same flotation pads that were used to move the Millennium Falcon in Empire Strikes Back. The same sort of pads underneath the rostra. And so that was it. We went for a journey around the galaxy. Well, this was amazing. It was created by an absolute theatrical genius, Ken Campbell. He then went on to do another stage show the following year, but Theatre Clwyd in Wales, they did a version of Hitchhiker, which they toured around just a few little local venues in Wales. So that was the second version.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third version was Ken Campbell doing it on a grand scale at an enormous old 1930s cinema, which at the time was called the Rainbow. It was a famous rock music venue.
Yeah.
Just every popular music group and stars had been there and played, you know. So this was an enormous place, very old, grand 1930s cinema. And it, unfortunately, the money, well, there was a lot of dodgy stuff going on backstage with the people imbibing certain substances. So it was all a bit ramshackle. Ken Campbell was not a man for organising the grandiose, you know. He was much better on a smaller scale. He was also the man that discovered Sylvester McCoy, just as a link, because Sylvester used to do his crazy little local tours that they did in a minibus, like a performing circus routine. I mean, Sylvester was Sylvester, you know, being the Seventh Doctor, he was a clown by nature. And he studied with Ken Campbell. Lots of famous people worked with Ken Campbell. Jim Broadbent, you know, was another one who turned up in various things later. He did a spoof Doctor Who once, and he's also the latter-day voice of Marvin. So there's lots of links. This great man to Ken Campbell. But that was it. That was the 3 first stage shows of Hitchhikers. Others did follow, many amateur versions. But then Douglas's agent, when he started getting really big and it looked like the movie would be a prospect, although it took many years for that to come to fruition, Douglas's agent, Ed Victor, quashed any sort of more professional productions for many years, because he knew that to get the big movie deal, you had to give them everything. So there was very little Hitchhikers merchandise. There's a towel you can see behind me that was done in the mid-80s. Yeah, the one with all the words on. It's the passage about towels, you know, it's woven into the fabric. And then, you know, he was saving it all up for the big movie deal, because he knew that those, you know, the Hollywood would want to have access to everything. So consequently, talking about stage shows, there were stage tours of the radio show. It's performed like a radio show with the actors standing, holding their script, standing at the microphone, but with someone at the side of the stage performing the sound effects and things like that. Well, there was a very elaborate tour done of a version of Hitchhiker by Dirk Maggs, who I've come to know, and I've filmed lots of his productions. I've done behind the scenes sort of filming. And he toured it in 2012 and 2013 all over the UK, with much of the original cast of Hitchhiker. But that was not a formal, proper sort of stage presentation of the story. It was very much the radio show. More like a gig, actually, because they had a live rock band playing the incidental music. So yes, there have been lots of stage versions over the years.
I just find it sort of fascinating, because the TV series is very much, that was my first their sort of Hitchhikers. And what I think my brother, now my older brother, must have either read the book or listened to the radio show, or quite possibly both, because it was him who was very much, now I'm a young, now 1981, now I would have been about 8, so I'm still, I'm young on that side to really get all of it. But I loved my sci-fi, this sort of Doctor Who, anything like that, and he was very much they will have to watch this.
Mm.
And we did, and I loved it for very, for lots of different sort of reasons. But as you can imagine, at that age, it's something that's also I was able to, love it very many different sort of levels, sort of going forward, and start to really see lots of different sort of concepts and themes and all sorts of things, sort of in it, certainly.
Well,
But,
that was the beauty of it, wasn't it? I mean, I said earlier about I grew up as a fan of Doctor Who and the Goon Show, and the Hitchhikers, to me, is like a synthesis of the pair of them,
yeah.
with a bit of Monty Python thrown in, because
Mhm.
Douglas was a Python fan and, actually did work with some of them.
Mhm.
It was, it answered, it fed my sort of interest in science fiction.
Yeah.
It did it in an amusing way. It was satirical, and it was mind expanding. Some of the concepts in Hitchhiker are extraordinary.
Yeah.
Douglas's fine mind, and his very carefully and painfully chosen words. He would work on a sentence and work on it and work on it until it flowed like magic. And some of the guys that have read the narrator, the guide itself, the voice of the book, who narrates Hitchhiker, have found that it's a real skill to get used to reading the lines in a rhythm, because he wrote really long sentences sometimes with sub clauses and parentheses and things, and so it's a challenge for a narrator to get that music in the dialogue and deliver it. And many of them have done very, very well with it. When they did the stage tour, they had different famous people come and play the book each night. So whatever venue you went to see the show, you'd get a different voice of the book, who sat on the stage with the script in a big, leather armchair, and would read from their position. And there were some really great people. Miriam Margolyes was hilarious.
Oh, I can imagine.
And the thing is, with the fan audience, those in the audience who knew every other version would almost like know all the lines and the pronunciations of all the weird alien names and planets and things. So if a reader said the name wrong differently from the way it was said on radio, you could see the sort of the fans sitting up almost wanting to correct them, but it was entertaining. I find it entertaining because it was different, and Douglas used to celebrate that each iteration of Hitchhiker was a variant. There's a word that's current, isn't it?
Well, that's
what
Loki. I've been thinking about, previously we chatted about this sort of Doctor Who, and we were saying about the the current their sort of series, how much we like it, how much we like Jodie, their sort of Whittaker. In my head for the past couple of years, I'm like, I'd love to see, say, Amazon or sort of Netflix give someone, a large amount of money to redo, or to do a new version of
a big expensive version.
Yeah.
That's the BBC. They do very well with the resources they've got.
Definitely, yeah. But
they do have to go to a different planet almost every week. So you're into you don't have a lot of standing sets with Doctor Who, just the TARDIS interior, and that's about it. But the rest of it has to be made up from week to week.
But my thoughts about Hitchhikers and making it sort of current, and what you're saying about the long-standing fans. But one of my own sort of thoughts is actually time that we didn't have Arthur their dent, but we actually have their Martha dent instead.
I don't know. You see, now I'm pretty open-minded about most things. I don't think I'd object to it, but it's written as a very square, old-fashioned British gent, isn't it? That's how Arthur's written. Douglas wrote it for the actor Simon Jones, who he was at college with, and in Footlights, the acting fraternity that he joined. In fact, Simon was instrumental in helping him join Footlights. And it's where so many other great British comedians sprang from, you know, that grounding in Footlights review comedy. And that it's another thing, the the wellspring for Hitchhikers was that sense of undergraduate review, you know, satirical and comedy review. And Douglas used to write for them when he was at college. And Hitchhikers was very much written in that style. And so when they did all the other versions, quite often the actors, the British actors, get it because they understand where it's coming from and they play to that style. The difference with the movie, that I think a lot of people felt that tonally it was so different, was because you had actors like what's his name, the guy who played Full Prefect, what's he called really, Yasin Bey or something. He played it in a very naturalistic style, you know, totally different. And Martin Freeman's Arthur was perhaps a bit more realistic, a bit more of a man of today, playing it in a different way. And all of them are playing to a different style than Hitchhikers was actually originally written in. And apart from all the changes to the script, you know, which were done by Kerry Kirkpatrick, I think that might be what led to some dissent about the movie. It's missing the tone in which the original was written.
Yeah.
But, you know, that said, there's going to be a new version. Sadly, it got stymied by COVID. I mean, we assume that Hulu are still going to do their version of Hitchhiker. It was announced to great fanfare. I did actually hear through the grapevine that studios were even booked at Elstree.
Right.
You know, where Star Wars was made.
Yeah.
It was all going to happen, and then COVID struck and it all got cancelled. So I'm still hoping that Hulu will get on and do their version, because it would be nice to see a brand new version, bringing it to a new generation. I hope that, you know, long after I'm gone in the future, there's going to be maybe someone who isn't born yet is going to play Arthur Dent in some medium we can't even imagine. You know, something futuristic.
I mean, you can tell me this, sort of, Kevin, because obviously you knew the Douglas, but I can imagine if he was looking down at lots of different versions just now with sort of changes, he would probably be quite they're sort of tickled by them, I would imagine.
I think so. I mean, I think we fans who you know, love the originals are protective of it, and we want to see it sort of not messed with. You know, we don't want people to take liberties with it. But I quite like the idea that someone's going to take the basic characters and structure and then go off on new adventures.
Yeah.
But if you're going to tell the original Hitchhiker, I think you should pay it proper respect. But we'll see. I mean, Douglas knew that Hitchhiker had weaknesses. When we were doing the big coffee table book, I had a meeting with him, which we recorded. And he was saying in that there was potential. It was going to be Mike Nesmith of the Monkees was going to direct a version. And he'd even met with James Cameron, was going to do a version at one point. I can't imagine that. How that would have been. Another story about that was that he went whitewater rafting with James Cameron. I can't imagine. Douglas was so large and ungainly, and I can't imagine him doing something as dangerous as that. That sends my mind reeling. And Mike Nesmith was obviously a big friend of Douglas Adams. If you ever read Mike's book, he talks about his friendship with Douglas. There was a bit of a meeting of minds there. And at one stage, John Lloyd, who producer of Blackadder and who co-wrote episodes 5 and 6 of the original radio series, and a great friend and flatmate of Douglas's, he was looking to direct a version at one stage. So all these possibilities, you know, just never came to fruition. And sadly, Douglas didn't live to see the movie version he'd longed for all those years. And I find that a great pity.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So going back to your work there, Kevin. Now, one of the things, you know, and funnily enough, you've touched on the voice of the book. Now, as a the sort of animator, and as a young animator, and getting the job here, but you know, how did that the sort of happen? Then how were you sort of fortunate enough to land?
Well, I told you about interviewing Douglas in '78. I did meet him a couple of times in the BBC club bar. I spoke to him a couple of times when I was visiting the studios, and then an extraordinary coincidence happened. Well, firstly, I was an art student. I did 2 years at art college instead of the sixth form at school. And while I was an art student, I was always fascinated by how Doctor Who was made, and I was lucky enough to visit the set a few times. And you know, I was desperate to get into the business somehow. And when I left art college, I sat about for a few weeks until my father said, "Oh, there's this recruitment thing on Capital Radio, independent radio channel." And they were making a great fanfare about trying to get the youth back to work. And of course, this was at the time when, you know, Maggie Thatcher had just come into power in 10 Downing Street, and there was a whole thing about trying to get the nation back to work. And it basically a local volunteer met me in the pub to find out what my aspirations were. And when I said I wanted to be an animator or work in special effects, they sort of rocked on their heels, because I think they were only really used to recruiting for factories and offices, you know. But remarkable, 3 weeks later, I found myself with an interview at a little animation company over in West London. Quite a long subway or underground train journey from where I lived, but it was a terrific opportunity, very low wage. But it was a tiny little animation studio, and I got the job. And I quit my Saturday working at the library, which I'd been doing. I'd been a librarian, a Saturday boy for a year or so whilst I was a student. And I started in the animation company. Well, I was working on corporate and industrial films and things like that, quite boring stuff, really. And a lot of letraset, you know, dry rub down transfer.
All right, yeah.
That's how it was done in the old days, before computers.
Yeah.
When it were all still fields around here, you know. And I was taken on mainly to do captioning, letraset captioning, and I sort of did that for a few weeks. And then, so this was in November of '79. In the January of 1980, at the place where I worked, it was called Pierce Studios Limited, and my boss was a guy called Rod Lord. I was working in the dark room, and I heard down the corridor, I knew that far down the corridor where I wasn't supposed to go were some BBC film cutting rooms. The BBC, it was like an overflow thing. The BBC rented a few rooms, and things like The Sky at Night, the astronomy program, and documentaries like Horizon, and something they called laughingly "Their Knife in Your Glands," Their Life in Your Hands.
Yeah.
They were all made down there. But I heard R2D2 bleeping.
Right.
Now, as a big science fiction fan, you know,
Yeah.
this was intriguing, and it was too intriguing to ignore. So I crept down the corridor and into the bit where I wasn't supposed to go, and peeked round the edge of the door. And there were two guys cutting a film. And it was a film about a little boy meeting Luke Skywalker and R2D2 on the set of The Empire Strikes Back, which wasn't, I mean, it wasn't out yet. That's how long ago this was. And it was for a now notorious program called Jim Will Fix It.
All right. Oh dear. Yeah.
And they looked up and they said, very pleasant. They looked up and they said, yes. I said, well, I heard R2D2. And then, oh, right. Well, how did you recognise that then? I said, well, every Star Wars fan knows that noise. He was surprised, you know, sort of middle-aged guys, sort of bewildered by this young urchin, you know, and I was a skinny, short little thing, you know. So anyway, they welcomed me into the room. We had a bit of a chat, and they said, oh, you're a science fiction fan. And this guy said, have you ever heard of something called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? So, of course, yeah. full of enthusiasm. Yes, yes. I went to the stage show last year, and I've got the record album, and I think the book was already out at that point, the first book. And I met Douglas Adams a couple of years ago, blah, 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 blah. And I hear there's going to be a TV version. And this guy said, yes, there is. And I'm going to produce it. This was Alan J.W. Bell, who was the producer and director of the TV series of Hitchhiker. Now, at that point, he didn't know anything about it, really. He'd heard one episode on the radio, which was like episode 7, the Christmas special. So he's a bit lost. I don't think he quite got it. But I think he was also quite intrigued by the fact that he was a youngster so enthused by it.
Yeah.
He'd just done a couple of comedy programs. He directed 2 episodes of Ripping Yarns.
Oh, yeah.
It was Michael Palin's own series of boys' own adventure spoofs. And he'd done 2 of those. That's why he was offered Hitchhiker. So I said, as soon as he said, I'm going to direct it, I said, oh, how are you going to do Zaphod Beeblebrox? He went, I don't think he's in the first episode. And he said, why, what's so special about him? And I said, well, he's got 2 heads and 3 arms. And Alan said, oh, I don't know, I think we might have to change that. And I went, a bit of an upstart. I went, you can't change that. He found it all very amusing. And I said, do you need any graphics or animation? And he said, funny enough, yes, there's a lot of computer graphics written into the script. So I said, well, my boss in the animation company next door, we're going to be getting a computer, which was something that was definitely in the air.
Yeah.
In fact, it took another 18 months or so before my boss actually did buy his first computer. And so I said, well, you must come and meet him. And I think at that point he said, I think they might have just said a brief hello, but he said, I'll be back in 10 days' time and we'll talk some more. And sure enough, true to his word, he came back and gave us a script. And there was some negotiation to do where Rod wrote a long, detailed budget proposal based on how the script read at that stage. And bizarrely, Rod's budget came in at sort of 50% of what the BBC's own graphic department had quoted.
Okay.
So there was a slight resentment from BBC Graphics, and someone was appointed to oversee what we were doing on behalf of their department.
Yeah.
But generally, once we'd made the first Babelfish sequence, was the first half of the Babelfish sequence was our sort of test piece that we did in sort of February, March, I think it was, of 80. That proved the concept. Douglas Adams came to give it his thumbs up. I was late in that day, so I missed him, but he left me a nice note, which I've kept ever since. So sorry to have missed you, Douglas Adams. I met him eventually, of course, as the project went on.
Yeah.
And then that was it. And that was my first year in the business spent working on Hitchhiker's Guide. So I was, I was a pig in shit, or seventh heaven, shall I say? You can edit that.
Exactly. I mean, I just find that's just so great that you can work on something that you love, that you've already loved. And but
well, it was a very just lucky, sheer luck, really, being in the right place at the right time. Fluke that I met Alan Bell, and he was very good to us. He left us alone, pretty much because he just liked what we did, and we got the script. Douglas got very excited, I think, after he'd seen the first episode. There was a bit of a gap while the BBC upper echelons discussed whether it was funny enough, and then whether they could afford it, because the first episode went massively over budget. And coincidentally, the first episode was edited in another BBC cutting room upstairs above where we worked. And so I went up there and saw the rushes of Arthur lying in front of the bulldozer. And that was my first sight of Simon Jones as Arthur Dent. Who, incidentally, it was his birthday yesterday. He was 71.
Oh.
But there he was, age 30 or whatever he was at the time. And I couldn't believe that he looked exactly how I imagined Arthur Dent to look. That voice that I was so familiar with from the past 2 years of listening to the radio show.
Yeah.
There he was in the famous dressing gown well, dressing gown that he made famous with that
Yeah.
show, sitting in front of a bulldozer in the blazing hot sun. I mean, they had to make up some mud because there wasn't any. It was unusually warm that May. You know, the rest of that year was me going into, I went to the studios, I did various bits of research for the guts of the babelfish. I went back to the old library where I'd worked, which was quite amusing to go back in a different, you know, tack sort of thing. And yeah, the series went on. I began to document as well the behind the scenes story, which years later, I borrowed a VHS portable kit. They say portable, it weighed a ton. There's this big old clunky piano keys VHS machine attached to a little boxy camera, you know.
Yeah.
But I filmed behind the scenes. I took photographs. I kept all the scripts. I just sort of stored everything because I was devouring it. It was so important to me. I was so crushed when they didn't make another series. That was very disappointing the following year. But it was a great time. And Douglas was very indulgent to me because he liked the animation. I think he had issues with some of the TV series stuff, mainly with the director. Sadly, Alan and Douglas didn't get on. Superficially they did, but afterwards it's always, I mean, that animosity grew over the years.
Right.
In the telling, you know, stories, sort of Chinese whispers gets distorted. At the time it was kind of, they kind of tolerated each other. But they were from different worlds. You know, Alan Bell was old school BBC and Douglas was sort of Cambridge Cliverclogs, you know, and the never the twain shall meet, really.
Yeah, I couldn't see
but
how that would, how that
it's a shame. There was some talk that Geoffrey Perkins, who had produced most of the first two radio series, he was actually going to be taking over as producer if Douglas got his way for series 2. But of course, the BBC was supporting Alan. You know, the head of department didn't see any reason to change it. And that's partly why it didn't happen. It was a great time. And of course, my career's crisscrossed with Douglas's ever since in all sorts of projects to do with his writing.
I just want to sort of touch on, Kevin, just before actually we move on there to our next part, but they're sort of design wise for the book and the animations. Did you have a free reign, or was there a lot of sort of notes or a lot of guidance that went on as to how it should look? Or
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Douglas got excited by seeing the animation and realizing, he could suggest this and suggest that. And it's noticeable that the later scripts, he started to describe things more. I mean, Douglas never really thought visually. He was always excited by words and ideas and things like that. But if you asked him, what does Marvin look like? He couldn't tell you. He just said, it's a gleaming metal machine that if it stood up properly, it would look really impressive. But it hangs in a sort of despondent and dejected way, which is what, when I got a chance to design Marvin for the, sorry, there was a bing on the computer there, it's me. When I got to design Marvin in '94 for the illustrated Hitchhiker, I was able to go more closely to his description of Marvin in the book. For the television series, we had a special meeting after a main production meeting, which sometimes I went instead of Rod. And I went to this one, and the heads of department, costume and visual effects, myself, I'm not sure if Douglas was there. I don't think he was. But we all sat around talking about what Marvin might look like. And Jim Francis from visual effects was the man who had to actually get on and make it. One of the things I remember was that I pointed out on the window ledge in Alan Bell's office was a little Easter Island head. And I said, that's a great face. That would look good as Marvin. And I think Jim Francis did incorporate some of that into the TV Marvin.
I can definitely see that, yeah.
Yeah, there's a sense of the big forehead, the sort of long jawline, long nose, you know. I mean, that's definitely there. But, you know, then other people went wild with it. You know, the movie did it with a big spherical head. It looked like one of those little Japanese toys. So that's a completely different take. And so, yeah, I mean, Douglas said that with the one that we did for the illustrated Hitchhiker, he reckons we got about as close as anyone ever has to what he thought Marvin should look like.
Yeah.
So I'm satisfied with that. My one, you know, well, it was built by a friend of mine, an old college pal, John Saville, who's a professional prop maker. He made that beautiful little puppet Marvin. It was about 3 foot tall and digitally made to be the size of the humans, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was it. And so, yeah, there were lots of opportunities to come up with ideas. Although Douglas wrote things into the script, there was lots of room for interpretation. And of course, I would slip in little in-jokes as well. Yeah, I enjoyed that. The weird thing is, of course, lots of people thought that they were computer graphics.
Yeah.
Not that we were drawing in pencil and then tracing in ink and cell, which is a very traditional animation technique. Lots of the lettering was either typed on an IBM golf ball typewriter and then expanded up, or it was me quite often doing the letter set for like the headings and the little diagram directions and notes that appear at the side. And they were backlit. The artwork was photographed in the darkroom, backlit under the rostrum, and then uncovered with bits of black card, one letter, one frame at a time, painstakingly, all shot by Rod. Rod was a genius, and I was very much, you know, the young acolyte learning at the master's knee.
It's funnily enough, I watched their sort of documentary about the making of John, the Carpenters, the Escape from the New York, which actually came out at the same.
Around about the same time. Yeah. I know what you're going to say. It's going to be that topographical landscape.
Yeah, done very much the same way.
Yeah, very, very practical, hands-on, old school special effects.
Yeah,
I heartily approve. I mean, they couldn't afford to do the proper computer wireframe thing, so they did it with models and high contrast film. Yeah. I mean, also, of course, in '82 we had Tron, which used lots of the same painstaking backlit cells and things to do separations on the characters to give that computerized glow to everything. And the colors, the way the colors were generated was multiple exposures and things like that. Very, very similar. But of course, they did also have computer graphics in there, which we didn't have the benefit of that. Hitchhikers did benefit from having Quantel at the time. I think it was Quantel 5001 or something, which was an image manipulation device, first sort of digital technology that the BBC got, where they could shrink the picture and move it and do things with it. And Alan got very excited by the technology. You know, he wanted to push them. The electronic effects guys, was it Dave Jervis and Dave Chapman? They all, I think they were very keen. Lots of people were very keen to work on Hitchhiker because they got a chance to display the best of what they could do, you know, and being, this is another typical BBC thing, it had a much bigger budget than Doctor Who at the time, which you think it would be comparable, but because it came from a different department, BBC's light entertainment department, which, you know, later did things like The Young Ones, you know, they came from a background with lots of musical guests and things like that. They got bigger budgets than the drama department.
Yeah, amazing.
Which is bizarre. It's just the way it's structured. So the fact that it was made by the light entertainment department worked in Hitchhiker's favour because they got that much more money. In fact, episode 1 cost 4 times what an episode of Doctor Who would cost at the time.
Yeah, so that's just
quite a big difference. Although that was massively over budget.
Yeah,
the rest of the series didn't have quite that budget.
I think this is a good part just to move on because, you know, we've spoken a lot about one, their legend, certainly very much. We're almost we're going to veer into the world of certainly another legend of the British their science fiction and their visual work as well. Fantastic, practical work like you've spoken about so sort of lovingly there, Kevin. You were fortunate enough to then work on the Jerry Anderson's their Terrorhawks in the 1983. Again, for people who don't know there's sort of Jerry Anderson, he's obviously famous for their Thunderbirds and their sort of Captain Scarlet, amongst many other. I often don't think sort of puppet is really the right sort of word for them, but they are sort of puppet shows basically with great sort of model work as well, which is the thing that has always sort of stuck in my head. He veered off into obviously live shows during their 70s. Their most sort of famously, I think, with the UFO and space. Their 1999. Their sort of Terrorhawks was kind of branded as them sort of going back to his their sort of roots, as it were. So another their sort of model stroke, their sort of puppet show, but one with a much more modern sort of sheen about it. And that modern sheen actually probably comes from a lot of the work there that you sort of did on it as well.
That's very kind of you to say. I think it mainly comes from Steve Begg, who is now one of the movie industry's biggest effects supervisors, who worked on Bond films and Batman and other stuff in more recent times. He went from Terrorhawk straight into doing Aliens, the model work on Aliens. So he got a good grounding on Terrorhawks. What happened was Jerry Anderson, who older fans in America might remember for Fireball XL5, that kind of thing, very long time ago. More sort of a bit further on was Space 1999, which had extraordinary model work of all the spacecraft and everything. They're the shows that are best known in America. But for Brits, yes, Jerry Anderson created lots of puppet shows. He coined a word. You were looking for a word. It's super marionation. And they were marionettes essentially, and that's what I grew up with. I remember my mum telling me, the man who made Thunderbirds, he's going to make a new show called Captain Scarlet. And so it was very much, it was all there. I had the annuals and there was comics and all sorts of things. And so the idea of getting to meet Jerry at a fan convention thrilled me. So I did a little film that was projected literally with 16mm projection at the convention, to sort of catch his eye, really. He saw it, he liked what he saw, chatted to him at the convention, and he said, when I get my next one off the ground, we'll talk some more. Well, I can't remember if he rang me or if I pestered him. I've got a feeling he rang out of the blue. And I recognised his voice immediately when he said, it's Jerry Anderson here. I knew who it was. And he came to visit Pierce Studios in the same studio where we did Hitchhiker. Skipping over it, we'd also done Blake 7. We did the bits for the title sequences and things like that. And whooshing stars, behind the Scorpio.
I know it well,
yeah. And then for Terrorhawks, it was about doing the title sequences. Now, in the script, it was just going to have some captions flash up. Earth invaded, Earth defended by Terrorhawks and the logo and that. But I wanted to do something a bit more. So I did a storyboard on spec of an idea of what the titles might look like, using the Hitchhiker techniques that would look a bit computery, And I presented him with this storyboard at a second meeting I had with him. First one he came to us, and then I went to Bray Studios, which was the old studios where they made Hammer Horror and things like that. And he'd set up base there. And I think I answered a problem for him, because his title sequences were always this episode, action-packed, big clips of things happening from what you were going to see to entice the young viewer. It was all made for family entertainment, and it was to get the kids watching. Flashing, lots of big explosions and rockets taking off, and it was always very exciting. But because he tighter budgets in the early 80s than he was used to, he was forced to work on 16mm. All his previous programs had been on 35mm. And he was old school editor. Jerry Anson was always at home in the cutting room. And the fact that he was going to, if he wanted to do an action-packed title sequence, he would have to duplicate the 16mm bits of film, which of course would go extra grainy because the image size is that much smaller. He didn't like the quality of duped 16mm. When I said that this title sequence could be shot on 35 and then 16mm reduction prints made, that to him was the magic answer. He could have one self-contained piece of film that could be duplicated over and over again with no loss of quality. So apologies to all the fans who loved, the original puppet show action-packed titles, but they got this animated sequence for Terrorhawks for that reason. But nonetheless, I was delighted because that got me the job. There was also the computer game that one of the characters, Neinstein, the hero character, played a little computer game every week, or not every week. The plan was it was going to be every week, but in the end they didn't use it that much. And it was, again, massive amount of artwork under the rostrum camera. Again, shot by Rod. Some computer graphics were involved because Rod, by this point, and his colleagues older than me, John Percy and Dave Hall, were using the computer, a drafting system, which the computer couldn't go straight onto film in those days. We had to go through an artwork process. So the computer drew out grids and buildings coming towards you and things in simple ink outlines on paper. So there was a plotter, and the computer would create these frames. The drawing would take, it could take up to 10 minutes each plot for each frame. And so we had like the tilting logo and things like that. They were all drawn in ink by the computer. Then again, taken into the darkroom, a negative made. So the black ink on a white paper became clear lines on a dense black background. And then a light underneath the artwork would shine up through it. And that's where you got the glowy, computerized, slightly neon look from it. Exactly how Hitchhikers was done, only this time there was a bit of computer graphics involved. And the same for the end titles, which was Tic-Tac-Toe or Noughts and Crosses coming up. Funny, amusingly, when we always used to laugh about Jerry, he'd prefer the simple answer when presented with it. I suggested that it was a game of chess between the Zeroids, the spherical robots, and Zelda, the evil witch's cubes. Would be like Noughts and Crosses, would be pieces on a chessboard. And Jerry, he went, chess is a bit complicated. Why don't we do Noughts and Crosses? So that's what it was. But of course, I get people who of a certain age would have been children when it was on. Over the years have come up to me and said, I used to love watching the Noughts and Crosses in the end titles every week.
That's what I remember. I remember watching that.
Well, if you watch the whole series, I think there's 39 episodes, 3 series of 13. We had 6 pieces of artwork. There was a 7th, which I think was only ever used on the first episode. But these same 6 pieces of artwork were filmed, and they could be flopped over because they were transparent. They were flopped over. So sometimes the cubes were the wicked ones. They would cheat. But the Zeroids would always win fair and square. So each week you didn't know who was going to win. And you could see that the artwork some weeks was the other way round. So a cube would slide in and bash a Zeroid out the way. And next week he'd be coming in from the other side. Just flop the artwork. But of course, because of crew changes, there was always people leaving, going off to other productions or whatever. I had to shoot the end titles for every single episode. Fresh for every episode, because Jerry always wanted that one strip of film. So there was no reduction in quality. The only difference is you can tell the ones that were shot on PS Studios, rather swanky rostrum, or when I'd shot it later at a little corporate company that I worked at in North London, who had a very basic setup and beg rostrum camera. It wasn't such a good lens. So, clever fans have spotted the slight subtlety and difference in the titles. But that kept me busy for another year and a half, working for Jerry, and we went on. I worked on some of the commercials that he did later, and very basic things. I didn't do anything quite so striking after that. And then, of course, he went on to make other things like Space Precinct, and I met him years later. I interviewed him. He came and took part in my Doctor Who documentary. I interviewed him for Starburst magazine's 200th edition. We did a video for that. Went behind the scenes on Space Precinct. So yeah, we crossed paths over the years. And again, another hero who's very sadly gone now.
Yeah.
But his son carries the flag. Jamie Anderson, very much waving the flag for his old dad.
Mm-hmm. And lots of these that sort of legacy lives on. I mean, I've watched some bits of the guys who are doing the Nebula, they're 75, and recreating the Thunderbirds and such like, and it's that.
Got it here. I've just got the Blu-ray. It just arrived. That's a friend of mine, Stephen Le Riviere.
Yeah.
Who came to me when he was making extras for the first DVD release of Terrorhawks, and a very young voice on the phone saying to me that he's going to be making these DVDs, and I said, "Who's your cameraman?" He said, "I don't know." How are you going to edit it? He said, "I don't know." So he managed to talk his way into this job. So I introduced him to another friend of mine, a cameraman and editor, and that, and he's very bright, very clever guy, and he absolutely adores the Supermarionation series. He wrote a beautiful book about it, and he made a loving documentary called Filmed in Supermarionation, which people should check out if they can find it. But yes, his latest thing, Nebula 75, was made during lockdown. He had a bunch of puppets and various bits of scenery and set and things in their flat. They live in an apartment above a shop in North London. In central London, rather, and they made it there during all the lockdown. So it's an extraordinary little series. I think it's such fun. It harkens back deliberately to the sort of late 50s, early 60s style of Jerry Anderson puppets, and it is made with love. That's what we always want, isn't it? As fans, we want to see something where somebody cares about what they're doing.
I think as well, though, if you're they're sort of British, they often say this about a lot of things. So sort of Doctor Who, even if you've never watched a lot of Doctor Who, you know Doctor Who. The Hammer films always sort of strike me. If you've never watched many of them, but you know them, because they're just everywhere and they were always shown on the telly. But Jerry's work as well. It's even if you've maybe never actually watched a full episode of Thunderbirds, Thunderbirds. It's just
Thunderbirds was the pinnacle of what Jerry did. Really, he really, the crew that he put together were such talented people, and they had honed their craft over several series. And then they did Thunderbirds, which was the only hour-long show as well, which unfortunately made it difficult to sell to America. So it's not as well known in America, sadly. There were a couple of feature films in the 60s. There was obviously was it 2005 or something like that? 5, 4. But yeah, it was Jonathan Frakes directed it.
Yeah,
that wasn't quite Thunderbirds as we remember it. They were trying really to make Spy Kids, I think, under another name. But the legacy goes on, and so yes, I was very fortunate to both work on Hitchhiker and then for Jerry Anderson. I look back on that as peaks. I did visit the puppet stages as well for Terrorhawks. I watched them filming sometimes, and also I made public appearances as the character. I did a 3 or 4 day tour of Scotland, playing Youngstar and Zelda alternatively. I think I did one in the morning, one in the afternoon. I was at John Menges on the main thoroughfare in Edinburgh,
Yep.
I think I did a toy shop in Glasgow, another one in Ayr. There was a sort of I got interviewed on the radio as well, which is hilarious because I arrived and they threw me on stage immediately at this kind of open day at a big sort of toy fair thing, and interviewed me as Zelda. So I said I haven't got the outfit on yet, so I had to go. I went under the table and just spoke as Zelda into the microphone, welcoming the kids to this toy fair. That was amazing. So yeah, Jerry, because my friend Susan Moore, who worked on Hitchhiker with me. Also, we worked on the stage play that Ken Campbell did in the middle of 1980, in the break between episode 1 and the rest of the series. And then she also worked for Jerry. She sculpted Zelda, the lead alien, and the little cohort of aliens around Zelda. And she did a couple of the others as well. But she made some life-size versions of Youngstar and Zelda for us to wear at a Christmas party. And then in the new year of, what would that be, 84 or something, we went in to see Jerry in his office all dressed up. And he hired us, he laughed and then hired us on the spot to go and do a personal appearance. And we got paid our full freelance rate as well, which was terrific. Yeah, that was great fun. So that was my little sideline, appearing as a Terrorhawk.
That's very, it's very funny. So, I mean, obviously, Terrorhawks is a children's show very much. There's some of the comments that I've had, particularly about the Zelda, is actually how they're sort of terrifying that she is. And that
yes, we don't get it as adults. We don't quite understand. But if you were a child at the time, Zelda was a scary creature on the screen. Although she always lost every week, Terrorhawks heroes, the heroes had to win. But Zelda, and the way she, whacked her son Youngstar with a stick when he was being naughty or whatever, and eating his granite crunchies. It was children's entertainment, but not as sophisticated perhaps as his earlier shows in the 60s. But I still say the model work is the model work is of a very high standard. As the series went on, because other heads of department left above him, Steve Begg, right from the onset really of the series, was left in charge of the effects, and it was just terrific work, and he was learning as he went along. But boy, what a grounding he got over that couple of years, because he ended up working on James Bond and Aliens and all the other things he's done since, Tomb Raider. He's been head of visual effects on so many big shows. Hey, my wife muttering in the background to herself. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Kevin. Please join us in part 2, where we discuss the Jerry Anderson's The Terrorhawks, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the Cash in the Attic, and lots more. Thank you.